Nehemiah chapter number 11. We are going to continue with Nehemiah. Nehemiah chapter number 11. I don't know if we'll read all of chapter 11. Again, like chapter number 10, there's a lot of names. This instead of the covenant being signed with the names, we've got more of the genealogy of the people in the city. Of course, they've completed the wall. They are reopening Jerusalem. All right. If you remember what Mark preached on Sunday night, they are setting things into motion here. I think he touched on it Sunday morning a little bit, not much, but just a little bit. They are beginning to set things into motion. Last week we looked at the covenant being signed, what the covenant was, what it said. We are going to go flip a little bit this morning than usual, because we normally don't just flip a whole lot anyway. But Nehemiah chapter 11, we may end up in 2 Chronicles. But as they begin to reopen Jerusalem, we begin to see, kind of looking back on what the city used to be back in David's time, Samuel's time, what it kind of looked like. They're kind of not exactly a mirror image of what it used to look like, but kind of getting back to where it was, kind of like what we are right now. We are just kind of getting back to the swing of things. All right, so Nehemiah chapter 11, in verse number 1, it says, "And the rulers of the people dwelt at Jerusalem. The rest of the people also cast lots to bring one of 10 to dwell in Jerusalem, the holy city, and 9 parts to dwell in other cities." All right, so we've got, if you go back to the tribes of Israel, I think this is Benjamin and Judah we're talking about. 1 of 10 come and represented that tribe in the capital, if I'm not mistaken. I'm pretty sure that was right. In verse number 2, it says, "And the people blessed all the men that willingly offered themselves to dwell at Jerusalem." All right, so in verse number 1, we see that they were either cast lots or they willingly went. Okay, so I'm going to I want you to just keep that little bit of that verse in mind. They went willingly. All right, so verse number 3, it says, "Now these are the chief of the province that dwelt in Jerusalem, but in the cities of Judah dwelt everyone in his possession in their cities, to wit, Israel, the priest, and the Levites, and I still can't pronounce that word, and the children of Solomon's servants. And at Jerusalem dwelt certain of the children of Judah, and of the children of Benjamin, of the children of Judah, Athaiah, maybe, the son of Uzziah, the son of Zechariah, the son of Amariah, the son of Shephatiah, the son of, I don't know, and the children of Perez." Now, again, we may end up skipping a little bit here just because I can't pronounce some of these names. But here, so we're going to skip down to verse number, where am I at here? Verse number 4. All right, so verse number 4, we go back, again, like I said, this is kind of mirroring, trying to get back things going to back the way they were back in David's time. But if you want to turn with me to 1 Chronicles chapter 9, we see, and I'm not going to read this, but 1 Chronicles chapter 9, I just kind of want you to see this. 1 Chronicles 9 and verse 2, it says, "Now the first inhabitants that dwelt in their possessions in their cities were the Israelites, the priests, the Levites, and Nethinims," maybe. Yeah, Nethinims. Okay, I've got that now. But you go back, you begin to read chapter 2, verse 2 through 17. You see a similar list of these names. Now, if you look again, the back before the city was destroyed, these were the same people that dwelt before, just on down the line of the different generations. Okay, so verse number, we're going to skip down here. I'll look at my notes again. Verse number 6. Verse number 6. And I'm going to try to make a point with some of this stuff. And verse number 6 says, all the sons of Perez that dwelt at Jerusalem were 468 valiant men. Okay? So if you go back to chapter 4, at the very beginning, when we begin to look at this, we've seen that these people had a mind to work. And we looked at some kind of mindset, at least every chapter, of what the kind of mindset these people had. These people had different jobs to do. They, when you begin to open back up, jobs begin to open back up. And this is kind of what I'm going to get at here later in this chapter. The different jobs that we have, or they have, and then the jobs that we have in the church, how important that they are. Okay, so these people, all the sons of Perez, they were the military. They were valiant men. That word valiant, if you don't know what that means, just is bold. They were bold men. So they would be the military, the city's defense. Okay, so look at verse number, and again, a lot of this is part of the genealogy. So not that it's not important, but we're just not going to look at that in particular. Verse number 11. Is that right? All right, so verse number 11 says, Seraiah, the son of Hilkiah, the son of Meshullam, the son of Zadok, the son of Meroth, the son of Ahitub, was the ruler of the house of God. Okay, so we find another job here, was the ruler. So what he basically done, and this is, help me out here, Mark, Sarah, you know how to pronounce it? I don't know. Sarai, okay. Okay. That is, again, you go back to 1 Chronicles, we see a different name here. He's the son of Azariah, who's, if my research is right, his genealogy again goes back to 1 Chronicles, but he was the head of the priest. So that was his job to do. Verse number 16. We're going to look at some more of this. Verse number 16. And Shabbathai and Jozabad of the chief of the Levites had the oversight of the outward business of the house of God. So if I'm not mistaken, these two guys made the temple look good. If I'm not mistaken, is that right?
Well, yes, you can say that. And also the Levites in general, they served in the temple. They done the work of the temple. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The priest performed sacrifices, but everything else that had to be done inside the temple was done by the Levites.
Yeah, okay.
But yes, they also took care of the outside, they mowed the yard and everything else.
Yeah, okay. That's what I was trying to get at here. Some of this kind of gets a little confusing sometimes, but that was their job. But look at the next verse, 17, and it says, and Mattaniah, the son of Micah, the son of Zabdi, the son of Asaph, was the principal to begin the thanksgiving and prayer, and Bakiah, maybe, the second among his brethren, and Abda, the son of Shammua, the son of Galal, maybe, the son of Jeduthun. So this was the guy that led the, my research here, it says the precentor. That's what he was. He led the song at the time of the prayer, the sacrifice. He led all of that. So so again, this can be a little confusing, but he was the leader of that. But he was I lost my place now. Yeah, so he was over that. So verse number 19. Verse number 19, it says, "Moreover, the porters, Akub, Talmon, and their brethren that kept the gates were 172. So the porters were in other words, they were the gatekeepers. If you go back and look again at 1 Chronicles chapter 9, in verse number 17, and the porters were Shalem and Akub and Talmon and Ahiman and their brethren. Shalem was the chief, who hitherto waited in the king's gate eastward. They were porters in the companies of the children of Levi." So again, it's the same people, just different generation watching these over this certain job. But they looked at they looked outward on the wall of the city, on the north, east, south, and west corners, and they had shifts to go look out of the city basically as a city defense. But that's what their job was to do. Like I read somewhere, there was an argument that there were so many of them that they were just done it during the day or something. It's not right. There were so many of them, so they took some watched by day, some watched by night. That was your typical defense of a certain city most of the time. So they took shifts doing that. But when you look here in verse number 21, and it says, "But the Nethinims dwelt in Ophel, and Ziah and Gispa were over the Nethinims." All right, so this was this Ophel here was a tower set up on the wall. This is where the Nethinims were. They were, and if you go back to 2 Chronicles, we see a little bit more detail in that. We're not going to look at that in particular, but it was, again, if my research is right, they did the serval work in the temple. So that's the slave work, right? So somewhere along those lines. Correct? Help me. Is it sort of? Okay. We'll just roll with that. I want to be right, so I don't want to be telling you something wrong. But that was where the Nethinims were. That was their job to do. All right. So again, we're gonna get somewhere with this, I promise. Verse number 22. The overseer also of the Levites at Jerusalem was Uzziah, the son of Bani, the son of Hashabiah, the son of Mattaniah, the son of Micah. Of the sons of Asaph, the singers were the business of the house of God. So the overseer also of the Levites at Jerusalem was Uzziah. Now Uzziah, that was his job, to look over the Levites, the people in the temple. He looked over, he made sure everything was going correctly. It was basically the manager position, made sure everything was going right. Okay, so we looked at that, and he was, yeah, okay, I'm making sure I got that right. But he was in charge of everything inside of the temple. All right, so we looked at that, and then we go back down to verse number 23. It says, "For it was the king's commandment concerning them that a certain portion should be for the singers due for every day." So you've got a new king here, and he wanted to make sure the singers got their portion every day, because that was, and I should have done a little bit more research on what the singers were, but that was his job. They were going to make sure the singers were going to get paid, so to speak. All right, so we looked at, I want to get a little bit more into this. Okay. All right. So the next verse number 24, it says, "And Pethahiah, the son of Meshezabel, the children of Zerah, the son of Judah, was at the king's hand in all matters concerning the people. All right, so this is, if I'm not mistaken, this was the new king. And you go back to Genesis, he had a twin brother. I don't remember what his name was, but that's how far his family goes back. But he done the king's work. All right, so whatever, he was over the city, making sure everything was rolling right. All right, so this is another job they were setting things in motion. Okay, all right, we look. Then you go back down to verse number 25, and for the villages with their fields, some of the children of Judah dwelt at. I don't know. I'm not going to try to pronounce that one. And in the villages thereof, and at Dibon, and in the villages thereof, at Jekabazil, and in the villages thereof. All right, so these guys, they were not in the city, but they were the suburbs. The rural areas, the outskirts of the city. This is where you had your farms, your different things such as that. That was on the outside walls of the city. All right, so they were still part of the city. It just wasn't inside of the city. So then you go back down here and you see all of these people. And I'm going to skip all that, but verse number 36, and of the Levites were divisions in Judah and in Benjamin. So the Levites were the priests in the temple. They were not in just one area. They were spread out in the different tribes, right? Is that?
Well, in different areas.
Different area, okay, yeah. But so they weren't, because you can't really reach everybody in one place because they were so far apart. So that's what the whole point of that was.
Well, you had such a big, the Levites were so many, and it talks about living in Judah and Benjamin. That's the place where they lived. That if I understand how the temple worked, the tabernacle worked, and all that, they shifted out their work.
Oh yeah, that is, yeah.
You understand what I'm saying? They shifted out the work because there were so many Levites that could work, and the Levites did not get a possession. They didn't get a piece of ground, so they went to live wherever they could because they served the Lord. That's what they done. So they lived, as it talks about Benjamin and Judah, that was the tribes or the area that they lived in right there, which was close to Jerusalem.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I read that somewhere. I don't remember. Okay, anyway. All right, so the whole point of this, and again, I didn't read all of that to make this point, but every one of these people that we looked at had a job to do in the city, whether it be the gatekeeper or whether it be the overseer of the priest. They had a certain job to do. And I want to look at that in our time. As a church, we all have a certain job to do, whether it be just mowing the lawn, cleaning the church, Sunday school teaching, whatever. Even, we had devotions Thursday at work, and Mitch really, I told him, I said, I think he got into my notes, straight out of my notes. But no matter how small the job is, the job was still important to get done, because this is the reopening of everything. And even after the fact it was being already open for a little while, the job was still important. So we look at that and we see no matter how small some of these jobs were to us, whether it be mowing the lawn, and honestly I think that is one of the biggest jobs, to keep the church looking nice. That job is just as important as being a Sunday school teacher or just being a regular church member. It's just as important because it keeps the church going. This is what was the key point here was, if they kept doing their jobs, they kept Jerusalem going. Like we look at America today with the economy reopening, even though it's going to take some time to get back to where we were. If we kept going, we will get back to where we were. So that's kind of what the goal here was, to, even though they weren't going to start back to where they were before, back in David's time, Samuel's time, the goal was to get back to that point. All right, and then we look here in a very important part of this chapter was the guy that we've been looking at the whole time. He was not mentioned in this chapter at all, and that guy was Nehemiah. Nehemiah his job here was to rebuild the wall, because that was what God wanted him to do. At this point, Nehemiah's job was finished. That was not a reason for him to quit, but even though his job was finished, but another reason to keep going. And you see the after effects of doing what God wanted you to do. And we see it here. These people, even though they went through so much as far as the internal affairs, fighting when they were building the wall, we looked at that, but you see what had happened after. Not necessarily a bad consequence by any means, but a good consequence, because the city was back up and running. Now, these people looked to Nehemiah for instruction, just as much as we look to Mark for instruction sometimes, as far as getting some things done around here. Our job is to, as sheep under Mark, as an under shepherd, right? Okay. Our job is to take a little bit of the load off of Mark, so he ain't doing everything. Piano playing, some kind of music, just really anything. That is our job, is to not only spread the gospel, but help Mark do that. And that's what these people were doing here. They realized, after they've read the law, they've got a little bit more of an understanding of it. They wanted to do God's commandments. All right, so that's kind of the point that I was wanting to make here. And we've got a few more minutes. Mark, you want to cover anything?
Well, I think a couple things you said. One, you talked about the internal affairs that Nehemiah run into while rebuilding the wall. He had to lay everything out in order to build that wall. He had to put everybody in a position to build that wall. And if you remember, what is that, Nehemiah 4 or Nehemiah 5, something like over there, there was some of them didn't want to work. You remember that? Nobles wouldn't, the Bible said the nobles wouldn't put themselves to work. So he had to deal with all that mess. But I think as we read this chapter right here, and I do appreciate you tackling them names, those are hard names to say, by the way. They are, I'll be honest with you, they are. I even have a self-pronunciation Bible that gives us the long and short vowels in it. It's still hard for me to read the same sometimes. So I appreciate you tackling all that. But I think you hit the nail on the head today, Jacob. In the very fact is everybody had a job. Everybody had a job that they needed to perform inside the house of God. And just be faithful at it. Just be faithful at that job, because there's none of us can do all of it. And that was true in the whole economy of Israel, just in the temple itself. Everybody had a position, because the priest couldn't do it. The high priest couldn't carry it all out. He had to have other people helping. And we've all got a job to do. And just need to get in there and do it. And the Lord set them out in certain ways. Yeah, and I think that's what we see right here. He was setting them up in what they were supposed to be doing. And we just need to be faithful to do it.
And I want to go back to verse number Where did it go?
While you're looking for that, let me say this, I don't envy you trying to say that.
But verse number 2, I wanted you to just keep this verse in mind right here as we looked at this. It says, "And the people blessed all the men that willingly offered themselves to dwell at Jerusalem." That word, that little phrase right there, that willingly offered themselves. I do not get paid to stand here and teach Sunday school. I'm glad I don't. I love to do it. If somebody wants me to teach Sunday school, I am willing to teach, because I know that is spreading the gospel to somebody, and that is the ultimate goal as we do this. If Mark got to the point to where he was just doing it for the money and not willing to do it just because it is spreading the gospel, probably need to check his heart somewhere. Just throwing that out there. If we get to the point to where we are doing it for self, we need to check something. We need to be willing to do the job of a Christian that God has called us to do, and that is spread the gospel throughout the world. No matter whether it be in Sunday school teaching or handing out a tract, we are called to do that, to spread the gospel to the world. So that's what I wanted to look at this morning. No matter how big the job is or how good we are at the job, as long as we're willing to do it, God's going to bless us. And Nehemiah here, he was willing to go out of his way to build the wall. And again, you see what had happened throughout these chapters that we've looked at. God has blessed the city right now, and what we're looking at here. But anyway, does anybody else got anything? All right. Sorry if it's some of these names, again, tough names. But even though some of the stuff can be a little confusing, especially when you're dealing with the Old Testament stuff, it goes back to what these people were doing, was wanting to learn more. Okay, so that's the end goal here. But anyway, I'm done.